Hello everyone, Downey Please here from the Derail Valley Discord, and I just wanted to make a quick tutorial on the DE-6 diesel locomotive that just got released with Derail Valley Overhauled. So there is no fancy tutorial booklet for the DE-6 like there is for the steamer, and I think I have my quick start guide. Yeah, so there's nothing like this that'll explain how to operate the DE-6 in the game yet, and I'm sure at some point in the future, I know that all future dev team is very busy right now and I respect them, but right now there is no tutorial on how to operate this locomotive, and I kind of just had to figure it out on my own. But you don't have to figure it out on your own. I am going to make this a relatively kind of off the cuff of my sleeve in-depth tutorial on the DE-6. For anybody who's just now unlocking it or unlocking it in the future, and you just want like some sort of tutorial on how to operate it. Maybe you're confused about certain things on this train. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get cracking here. I am at Machine Factory in town, and I pulled this one out of the roundhouse. This is locomotive 007. I'll show you guys where the roundhouse is real quick. And so this is the roundhouse at Machine Factory in town. You'll usually find diesel locomotives where there's a roundhouse, but you can pretty much find one of these orange diesels just about at every station on the map. Like, I think the only one I didn't see one at was Steel Mill. So yeah, usually where there's a service yard or a roundhouse, you'll find one of them. Obviously, you need to pay the $200,000 for the DE-6 license in order to operate this beast. But once you have that, you can spool it up, put it on the turntable, and roll it off wherever it is you may go in your adventures in Derail Valley. But now that we kind of got that out of the way, yes, you do pay $200,000 for this locomotive's license. But once you have it, you're good to go. You can operate any of them anywhere in the world. But now that we have spent a gratuitous amount of money and we are extremely poor, let's play with our new toy. So, first things first, when you're operating this locomotive, when you're trying to climb on, easiest way to do it is to aim up here or up here, and then just press the F key and you'll teleport up to the top. Boop. Now we're up here. This is something that seems to trip a lot of people up, is the door, right? First of all, you can phase through the door. You don't need to use it, but if you'd prefer to use the door, left clicking and dragging can be kind of finicky. You can't see what I'm doing with my mouse right now, but this is kind of awkward. The easiest way I've found to open the doors on this locomotive, and they all operate the exact same way, no matter how you're facing, is to use the mouse wheel, right? So if I just pull my mouse wheel towards myself, I'll open the door. Don't worry about slamming it, that just means it's locked in place. So now I'll walk in. Even though I'm inside now, if I push the mouse wheel away from myself, that closes the door. That works for all the doors in this locomotive. So, pull towards yourself on the mouse wheel, open. Push away, close. Same thing's going to apply here at the fuse box, or the breaker box, which is the next step. Once we're in the locomotive, we want to get it fired up, right? So, this is your cab. All my equipment is in a good position, right? So I got my brakes applied, I got my throttle at idle, I've got my reverser neutral, and my dynamic brake off. Remember, the locomotives save the state that you left them in, so you always just kind of want to check, make sure everything makes sense before you start up a locomotive that might end up running away from you. So we know our controls are good. Next thing we need to do is we need to get power to the locomotive, otherwise it's not going to have anything to ignite itself with to have an ignition. So pull away from myself on the mouse wheel, open up the breaker box. You can click these, but I'm going to use the mouse wheel. Mouse wheel up on the 3 of these, that'll flick them on. Then you flip the big one, same thing, mouse wheel up, you get the nice green light, that means you got power. I'm going to push away from myself, that's going to close the breaker box. Pull towards myself, I'm going to open up the door here, and push away from myself, going to close it. So, the engine, which you actually have to go to the engine bay to start this locomotive, is 1 set of panels, 2 set of panels, vented panels. It's on the engineer's side of the locomotive. Now, I find that the easiest way to open these is to take the one that's furthest from you. So if you were starting on this side, that would be this one. Take the one that's furthest from you, mouse wheel towards yourself, open the door, step in, mouse wheel towards yourself, open the other one. So, in here, this is a big old V12 engine, I think, or V16, something ridiculous. And I believe it's turbocharged. Anyway, so now we go ahead and just, I'll sit down here. We have our primer and our engine starter. Now we're just going to rock the primer back and forth a couple of times. That's going to put some fuel in the cylinders so that we have something to start, something to burn when we run the ignition. So I'm just going to rock it back and forth by pushing my mouse wheel forward and backward. About 3 times is usually good enough to get it running. This is important. So on the shunter, the bottom of the switch represents off and on, right? On the diesel, the top of the switch is kind of like your arrow, right? So in order to get into the on position, we want the top of the switch to move to the right. So I'm going to click and drag to the left, and we're running. Good, I'll lower the volume a little bit here because it's loud. So, now the engine's running. Sweet. Let's go ahead and get back in the cab. And now the next thing we can talk about is the openable windows in this locomotive. Now they work opposite of the doors. So if you want to open these with the mouse wheel like I do, which I feel is the easiest way to do almost everything in this game now, you push the mouse wheel away from yourself to open the windows, and you pull it towards yourself to close the windows. Fun fact, I'm going to go ahead and open some windows, open some doors, right? I'll even open one of the maintenance doors, right? As soon as I jump off this locomotive, watch this maintenance door. Oop, it shuts, right? So anything that you do as far as door state is concerned on this locomotive, or window state, as soon as you step off, it's going to close. So just keep that in mind. Alright. So now we're in the locomotive. Everything's running. We've got our train hooked up here. I've got this one hooked up, but I haven't started the job yet. I'm just going to go ahead and quickly verify all my hoses are set up, all my chains are set up, my buffers are good. Go to the back of the locomotive. This guy isn't hooked up, this valve is shut. Good. So, I personally know this locomotive is good, so I'm kind of doing a rushed hosh-posh job. Normally I would be a little more precise. Check all the hoses, check all the connections. If you do have a bad connection, you will get a red light up here letting you know one of your brake valves is fucked. So, now we're in the locomotive, we got everything running. By the way, if this is awkward for you, as it is for me, it's a little too high, you can press X on your keyboard. This is primarily a mouse and keyboard tutorial, and that will put you in a sitting position. You can still kind of move around, but slower. I kind of just use it as if I'm adjusting my seat. I usually like to sit about here, so I can look out the window, lean out, and I got my controls on my left. So, let's quickly talk about the brakes on this locomotive. We'll start there and we'll work our way through all the controls. So, you got your train brake. That applies pressure to all of the brakes on all of the cars on the entire train, including the locomotive. As you can see, we went from 4 bars down to 1 bar of pressure. So I would say the entire train is pressurized with emergency service brakes right now. Let's go ahead and pull that back. I'll release them. And watch how long this takes. This is going to take a while. We want to get up to 4 bars. So this is all time, if your locomotive's moving, that you're waiting for your brakes to release so that you can start picking up speed again without damaging your brakes or just forcing throttle in while you have brakes applied. So take that with a grain of salt. When you're using this, use it sparingly. I usually use like 1 to 2, maybe 3 notches of this at any given time. I primarily use this brake when I'm going down a grade and I need to hold a certain amount of speed. So I'm going down a hill, I want to hold 40 kilometers an hour, I'm still accelerating, give it 1 notch of train brakes. Maybe I'm not accelerating anymore, give it 2 notches of train brakes, I'm starting to slow down, I'm getting down to 40, release the brakes. And the other thing you need to keep in mind is, if you want to get down to say like 30, and we slam these brakes, you should just start releasing them immediately, because by the time they pressurize and release, you'll probably be down at your target speed. I don't recommend doing that, but just keep it in mind, it takes a long-ass time for these brakes to apply and release pressure. This is your independent brake down here. This brake is super responsive. It only applies brake pressure to the locomotive, and this is the one you want to use for everyday use, if you will. So if we're just moving around a yard and we're not too heavy and we're not too fast, you can usually apply 1 to 2 notches of train brake and do most of your leg work with the independent brake on the locomotive. You always want to release the train brake, then the independent brake. If you don't need a whole lot of braking force, sometimes you can get away without using the train brake at all. Like in a yard, sometimes I'll just use the independent. Brakes on the DE-6 are very powerful, so just bear that in mind. But let's get to the fun stuff now, because I doubt y'all are here to hear me talk about brakes. So you got your reverser here. This has 3 settings. It's kind of like the gear shifter on your car. You got reverse, forward, and neutral. Now when we're in neutral, just like if we were in neutral in our car, not going to go anywhere. So this throttle has 8 notches. Whenever you just start out moving, you just want to give it like 1 or 2 notches, and always let the train settle into the power you're giving it. Try not to give it more than 1 notch at once. Give it a notch, let it settle. Am I moving the way I want to move? Give it another notch. Instead of just saying let it settle, a way I could be a little more descriptive here is, I mean, if you want to be scientific about it, wait 5 seconds, right? So like, give it a setting of power, count to 5. If it's not what you want, give it another one. If you ever have a whole lot of power though, don't hesitate to yank it back down to idle. That's not a bad thing. It only works in one direction, that you really gotta be gentle. Dynamic brake, I'm not exactly sure if this is implemented or works entirely properly yet in Derail Valley as of build 80, second day of release. If you want to test it yourself, use it at your own risk. For now, I don't trust it. I'm not even going to really go into what it does. If you've played other train simulators and you understand the concept of a dynamic brake and you're feeling froggy and you want to jump and you want to risk wrecking your train, feel free. I haven't decided whether or not I want to risk a train testing this out yet. Haven't needed it. The independent and the train brakes have been more than enough for me. So my advice is, don't use this until we know more about it, whether it works properly or not, how it works, etc., etc. Also, for an absolute beginner, dynamic brake can be kind of a foreign concept. Headlights don't work. Bell doesn't work yet. As of second day of build 80, these will be implemented later on. Cab light does work. I feel it makes the gauges easier to read, so I usually keep it on. Emergency cutoff button, we don't want to press that ever. We can shut the engine off from in there. We'd use this if there was like a fire on the locomotive or some reason we needed to stop the locomotive immediately. We can shut it off down there in the engine bay. So I probably wouldn't press this ever either, but feel free to if you would like. Sander, right here. Just a yellow button deploys sand. That's your sand gauge, how much sand, sand you have left. You got your fuel gauge here, you got your oil gauge here. So, as you operate this vehicle, it will consume fuel and oil the same way a steam engine consumes water and coal. It will consume more fuel than oil. You will also just put general wear and tear on this engine as you start it up, shut it down, and operate it. So that is basic maintenance you will have to pay for at a service area for this locomotive as you use it. This locomotive carries a tremendous amount of fuel, and it burns a tremendous amount of fuel with its 12 or 16 cylinder engine. So bear that in mind as well, that it is going to be expensive to operate this engine, even just leaving it idling in the yard. So make sure you are hauling jobs that are worth it. I'd say at least like a long one type job, something in the 20 to 50,000 range. However, beating the time requirement is going to be extremely easy in this locomotive, as it is very fast and very responsive and very easy to use. It's nothing like the steam engine, it's nowhere near as difficult to operate, it's just a bigger, beefier, louder shunter. Of course we got the horn right here. I don't think I covered that. I'm just using the plus key to do that. And I think that's everything. I think I've covered all the controls, so what I'll do for you guys now is I will just quickly take the brakes off, let my brake pressure build, and then I'll just quickly roll it forward and roll it back for you. Show you the basic operation of this thing in a yard, and then I will hand it off to you. And I hope you have as much fun with this DE-6 as I am right now. And if you have any questions about this locomotive, you can feel free to contact me at DowneyPlease, DOWNEYPLZ, in the Derail Valley Discord. There will be a link to the Derail Valley Discord in the description of this video, as well as my personal Discord ID. If you have any questions about any of the locomotives or anything relative to Derail Valley, feel free to PM me or jump in the Discord and ask any of the guys in there. Feel free to PM me, especially anything relevant to the steam engine. I'd say that that's where my real level of expertise lies. This is just something I quickly threw together for the community because a lot of people are going to start unlocking the diesel probably within the next day or so, and I recently discovered that there's no paperwork for it. So, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and take it for a spin, shall we? Go ahead and put the throttle to notch 1. Let the locomotive roll. Make sure our brakes are fully released. I didn't have the independent brake fully released. 2 blasts of the horn, we're rolling. I'll bring it up to notch 3 for you guys, just to kind of show you what I mean about letting power settle in. So there we go, power is kind of settling in. I'm going to bring it up to 30 and then I'm going to slow it down. So that's notch 3. That's about 30. Just going to bring it back to idle. 3 notches of independent brake, 1 notch of train brake. I find that I never use more than 2 to 3 notches of train brake, and I usually give 1 notch of independent brake for every 10 kilometers an hour I'm traveling, and that seems to be a good formula for getting this to slow down in a relatively quick amount of time, safely, without bumping the cars, without wearing out the brakes too much, without damaging the wheels. If you need more brakes, use more brakes, but if you're just doing general purpose braking, that seems to work out real well. I'll go ahead and throw it in reverse now, and I'm just going to back it back into the yard here. 1 long blast because we're backing up. As you can see, we're not totally moving yet because that brake pressure hasn't completely built up. We're also going uphill now, slightly. Give it another notch. notch, power's settling in. Alright. And there's a perfect example of power settling in. Once this RPM gauge kind of gets where it's going, that's a safe time to give another notch. I'm going to go ahead and pull out the power. One notch on each brake. I'm going to take the train brake out now. And we're still moving, but we're slowing down the whole time. So this is the best way to kind of break one of these locomotives, is to be comfortable with how far you're going, when you need to stop. Use as little brake pressure as you can in case you gotta release it. Now I usually put like 3 to 4 notches on the independent and 1 to 2 notches on the train brake when I'm stopped. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Put the reverser in neutral, make sure your throttle's in idle. And there you go, ladies and gentlemen. That is how to operate the DE-6. The last thing I'm going to go over with you guys real quick, and then I'll end this video, which has kind of gone a little longer than I would have liked, is how to shut down the engine. So, we'll open this up. Same thing as we did earlier, just this time we're going to click and drag to the right, because we want the top of the switch to the left, and that'll shut the engine down. And she's off. Go ahead and close that. Now I use the sitting position button, so X when I'm working down here just makes it easier to see things. You can also crouch, but I feel like that's a little too low. X seems to be just right, that sitting position that we were using earlier. But all personal preference, especially if you're in VR and none of this applies to you. Close up all the doors. Remember, you want to check your controls before you leave the locomotive, because it does save the state that you left it in. Make sure it's not anything weird, like that would be bad. Start up the locomotive and it just starts going ham. So, then we'll go over to our fuse box. We'll shut off our breakers, right? So, 1, 2, 3. Big breaker. And that's the locomotive cold and dark. All the windows and doors are closed. Let's go ahead and hop out now. And just hop off. Well, I hope you found that informative. I just kind of threw this together off the cuff of my wrist because, like I said, I know a whole bunch of you guys are going to get this locomotive in the next day or so, and you might be a little concerned when you find out that there's no paperwork explaining how to operate it yet. I'm sure when Alt Future team does get around to making a guide to how to operate this vehicle, they will do a much better job than I did, but for now, I think this is good to have. I sure do wish I had something like this when I first unlocked this locomotive, and I was like, great, what do I do next? I didn't even know how to start it. I just kind of had to play around with it and ask in the forums. But yeah, hope you found this helpful, and if you like this video, stick around. Hopefully within the next day or so, I'm going to get what's been requested the most, which is an in-depth, and I'm talking in-depth, soup to nuts, beginning to end, tutorial on the steam locomotive and every aspect of it. So if you've ever felt uncomfortable operating the steam locomotive, if you feel like there's too much that you got to do, it's too much multitasking, it's too hectic, I can't operate this thing and live my life at the same time, let alone hear myself think, don't worry. There is a way to make operating the steam locomotive really fluid and really smooth and really easy and actually quite a lot of fun. In fact, if this vehicle wasn't brand new and I wasn't excited about it, I'd probably be operating a steam locomotive right now. So, with that out of the way, hope you guys found this helpful, and catch me in the steam locomotive tutorial in the near future. I will see you all next time.